Hi everyone. We're going to take a look today at Daniel's prophecy of the temple's destruction in Daniel 9:26 and then the destroyer's covenant in Daniel 9:27. Both of these two verses involve the temple and its destruction and the destroyer's actions. So let's take a look at the fate of the temple in Daniel's times with like a little outline of dates that apply in this time period. So in 605 BC, Babylon seizes young men in Israel, including Daniel, and takes them to Babylon. So that's how he ends up in Babylon from Israel. In 598 BC, Babylon's first mass forced deportation of the Israelites in large numbers occurs. It's sometimes called the Babylonian Captivity, but there's two phases of it, so we're specifying the first phase there. In 587 BC, Babylon returns to Israel for more mass deportation, so that's the second effort at captivity, and so that completes the two steps. In 586 BC, Babylon goes back to Jerusalem and destroys Jerusalem and its temple. And then in 538 BC is the estimated death of Daniel. And then in 444 BC, Nehemiah decides to rebuild Jerusalem and its temple. So that's when the second temple was built. Or it wasn't built that year. It was built over, I think it was like 40 years. In the book of Daniel, he informs us about himself. In the BibleStudies.org page on Daniel, it says, several times Daniel refers to himself as the witness of the events he describes in those verses there, and claims that he was present in the royal court in Babylon from shortly after his exile from Judea in 605 BC to around 535 BC. And the last video we did on this, we pointed out that God commanded Gabriel to tell Daniel he was highly esteemed and that God would send a Messiah by 69 times 7, and in years, that is a specific date that comes out to 32 AD, who would be cut off sometime after 62 times 7. And this is in Daniel 9:25 to 26. So it coincides that when he comes into Jerusalem, at the same time he's going to be cut off, and it fits both prophecies of those two verses. And then we were told that God would make an atonement for iniquity by 70 times 7 in Daniel 9:24, which we know from Jesus' statement to Peter is 70 times 7 means as much time as necessary for that to be done. But that was also being done at the same time Jesus' Messiah was cut off. Okay, but today we're going to look at number 3 and 4. This is the prophecy in Daniel about the destruction of the city and the sanctuary at a time after 62 times 7 years, and that's in Daniel 9:26. And we'll see that's going to be fulfilled in Titus destroying the city. And even a little more interesting is the destroyer, leader of an army, will make a covenant with many for 1/7 period, and we'll learn that it can be any period of time, but this I think is going to be months, who in the middle will, quote, put an end to sacrifice and offering, followed by setting up an abomination that causes desolation. That's Daniel 9:27. Okay, and as Tim LaHaye in this book, The Popular Bible Commentary, says, the word week also means 7 because the Hebrew word Shavuot means 7 of anything, days, months, or years. So you can judge by events as they unfold. You can see whether that's prophetically was intended in months, days, or years. Last time we looked at these two verses, and the Messiah or Anointed One is mentioned in 25 and 26, and we already covered 25, and we're going to cover 26 today, because inside of that prophecy about Messiah, it says there in the second sentence, the people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And we're going to discuss that prophecy. Okay, so the trigger in both verse 25 and 26 was then an order will go out that you will rebuild the city and the temple. And that what happened was the Jews were taken out of their country by the Babylonians. And this was like in the 580s, 590s, and then they ended up going back approximately 70 years later. And then in 444 BC, they make a decision that they're going to rebuild the city and the temple. And that's in the Jewish Encyclopedia, article Nehemiah, 1989, page 520, and it says, this order went forth in 444 BC when Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem in 444 BC with an appointment as governor of Judah, and his first action was to rebuild Jerusalem, including the temple. And in the prior video, we showed you mathematically that when you use the lunar months in the calendar that Daniel was living under, he's living under the Babylon calendar, and it was basically 30 days a month for whatever. So when he's saying years, you do the calculations. The Babylonian lunar years would be 483, 360 days a year, converts into 476 solar years at 365 days. If you then subtract 476 from 444 BC, you get 32 AD as when the Messiah would enter Jerusalem, and then he's cut off, and that has to be, that's consistent with the other verse. That happens when there's 62 sevens gone by, and that's within the same time frame. So he comes into Jerusalem, that had to be specifically in 32 AD, and then then he's cut off, and that fulfills the verse prophecy about he has to be killed or cut off after 62 sevens. So those are two prophecies. And if you want more detail on that, look up the video on that. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the verse 26. After 62 sevens, the anointed one would be put to death and will have nothing. Now you have to understand these sentences are going together. So the trigger in verse 25 is still applying here. Okay, so this means after 62 sevens, after the order went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Anyway, the anointed one would be put to death and will have nothing. We already covered that. The people of the ruler, and we'll see the Israel Bible says it's the leader of an army, who will come, will destroy the city and sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. So here's a bigger blow up of that. So clearly, Jesus comes comes in 32 AD into the city of Jerusalem. That's what the first part of this is, and but it's after 62 periods 7. So it could have been any time after the 62 periods of 7 that he came in and was put to death. It just so happens it coincides with the other prophecy, which is at 69 sevens. He would enter the city, and that's exactly 32 AD. Now, when we come to the issue of the prophecy of the destruction of sanctuary, it's likewise after. See the first word in that verse? After the 62 sevens. So anytime after can fulfill it. So it could have taken longer than 70 AD, but it didn't. So, but that's still a fulfillment of the prophecy. And we'll also see that Jesus makes a prophecy about it as well. Okay, I want to show you by comparison what the Israel Bible has, because it has some helpful differences. So I'm just going to read the language, and I'm not going to read the bracketed text at this point. And after those 62 weeks, the anointed one will disappear and vanish. The army of a leader who is to come destroy the city and the sanctuary, but its end will come through a flood. Desolation is decreed until the end of war. Okay, so what's beneficial about this is, see in the first line, and after those 62 weeks, so that is pointing back at the 62 weeks in the prior prophecy, which was when the Messiah would come, and obviously it means to the city of Jerusalem, probably as a king, as a Messiah, and so he's going to come at the 62 plus 7, 69 week point. This is saying after those 62 weeks in the prior one, which is triggered by what? By the order in 444 BC to rebuild the city. So this is saying we're taking the 62 weeks in the prior verse, and we're saying it's going to be the destruction of the temple in the city is after the 62nd week, which by the way would be 18 BC. But it could be any time after 18 BC. That's all it's saying. So I'll tell you why that's important in a minute. And then the army of a leader, I think, is much more graphic, and therefore, the drawing into the prophecy here of looking at the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman army is perfectly strengthened. You can see it more clearly. But its end will come through a flood. So why is that a good a better translation. Look what happens. The Cambridge Bible commentary thinks the 62 weeks here is after the 69 weeks in the prior verse, as if they're totally different, because it didn't repeat the condition in this verse that it had to be subject to the order of 444 BC to rebuild the temple. So they go here, the anointed one in 926, what we're looking at, cannot be the same as the anointed one of Daniel 925, the verse before. For he lives 62 weeks, 434 years after him. So they're actually adding this on top of the 69 weeks in the prior verse, because they just that one word, those 62 weeks, it tells you there's some referent in the Hebrew that we missed, our scholars with all their genius missed, that the Jewish people, they're not trying to help us prove this is prophetic. Believe me, they're just translating it straight the way it really is. And it's telling you that 62 weeks in this verse is the same as the 62 weeks in the other. And but here you have the Cambridge Bible saying, well, they can't be the same. There's like two different messiahs. There has to be, because we don't see the reference to the order to rebuild. So just the slightest being off, not knowing Hebrew as well as the Hebrew people, as well as the Jewish people, we don't always get it right. So it really is another reason why we need to become more friendly to Jewish people and scholars, because they could help us actually translate these things right. I don't think our Christian scholars are yet up to the muster that they need to be to do this right, because this is a major NIV is a major translation, and the Jewish people are getting this right, because it's also obvious in context. It should be. It doesn't mean to switch gears, and now you have 62 weeks on top of the 69 weeks. It's just you could almost tell by using this little subframe of 62 weeks, it was going to want to reuse that for some reason and say, hey, as to those 62 weeks, I want to tell you something else that's going to happen after that time. And that's exactly what this is. So anyway, this is good to look at, and for the reasons I just said. And we're also going to review this verse today and try to see if we can prove it was fulfilled with Titus as he destroyed the temple and the city. Verse 27, he will confirm a covenant, so that's the leader of the army, with many for 7 of anything. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Okay, I just want to show you something. This is a screen capture. I typed in how many months did it take to, what was the start and end of the siege of Jerusalem, and up came these dates. I screen captured it, March to September 70 AD, and that's 7 months. Okay, if you look, they'll say, oh well, many places will say it started in April and ended early in September, so it's like 6.5 months or 6 months, whatever it is. So, but the military website I looked at, this weapons and warfare website, it had it March. You see there, I circled in red, March to September 8, 70 AD. So what's going on? Well, I think they're taking into account something that a lot of other people don't think about. Well, you have to amass troops. So we'll see later they're amassing their troops in Egypt. So they're getting all their ally client states to send troops, and they're amassing in Egypt, and they're going to then march over the Sinai Peninsula and all the way up to Jerusalem and circle it, and they're going to wait until the Passover until they attack. It's just going to act like they're, it's Roman territory. They can go wherever they want. So you can't object and you can't ask, why are you here? But they are waiting for the right time to attack. So yes, the siege may have started in April, right during the holiday, but they were there. It was part of the war steps they took. And so yes, you could say it was a complete period of time. So it appears to be that even people who are, don't have any stake in whether prophecy came true or not, they actually say that. So I just screen captured what Google came up. I said, what's the start and end of the siege of Jerusalem? And these dates popped up on the screen without me typing anything else. Okay. Okay, so in Daniel 9:27 it says, "He, the destroyer of the city and sanctuary, will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7." And we don't, I'm suggesting it's 7 months because it could be seven of anything. We just saw that, but now, what would be the covenant? Well, it seems pretty obvious. Is you would have a covenant with ruler states, client ruler states. So there's ruler states that you ally with, and they're going to bring them in, and they want to ally to get credit and gain favor with Rome. So here's how I would put it. We also know that 33%. Well, this is based on a YouTube I saw called "Siege of Jerusalem Part 1" documentary by Invicta. Okay, and this is at the 3-minute 12 mark. We also know that 33% of the troops sieging Jerusalem came from the region's client rulers when the troops were first assembled near Alexandria, Egypt. Okay, and then the citation to give you there to the YouTube. The entire force was estimated at 60,000 men, hence about 20,000 came from the region's client rulers, but using that formula 1/3. The documentary states that it may be speculated that local rulers were eager to donate men to the war effort in a political bid to secure Rome's goodwill. That's at 3 minutes 49 seconds. So that easily represents the covenant with many. I think that's pretty obvious. Okay, so we're going to further examine Daniel 9:27, if its fulfillments or circumstances. So it's talking about the wing of abomination shall come one that makes desolate. And so what does God think about, let's say, Roman troops entering into the Holy of Holies? So we're going to see later they went into the Holy Holies. They pulled out all the high priest items, clothing, all of that. They brought it all out, and actually they showed it in Rome later. They considered that a victory over the Jewish God. So, and they boasted of that. So anyway, so let's read Ezekiel 44:7-9, and we're going to see that God believes when uncircumcised people come into his temple, they have not properly prepared their bodies to do that, and it's an abomination to God. Okay, it's just that's the way God looks at it. Verse 7, in that you have brought, now he's telling Israel what you've done wrong, in that you have brought in foreigners, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, to be in my sanctuary, to profane it, even my house, when you offer my bread, the fat and the blood, and they have broken my covenant, and to add unto all your abominations. So this is on top of everything else you're doing, and you bring in the uncircumcised Gentiles. Thus says the Lord Yahweh, no foreigner, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, shall enter in my sanctuary of any foreigners that are even, and what it really means is even if foreigners that are among the children of Israel. So this applied to foreigners who were coming in and foreigners who were living there. No foreigner, not an inch, can enter into my sanctuary, and the priest regarded that as the special area of the temple, and they put in a special wall of separation, a middle wall of separation, so the Gentiles who were uncircumcised should not pass through it. Anyway, that would make be an abomination according to God in this thing, in this verse, in this passage. So we can see that's likely or could be what this verse applies to. So we have another circumstance that appears to be satisfied by the siege of 70 AD by the Roman army entering into the Holy of Holies. And here's Tacitus talking about the abomination that causes desolation, the actual proof of that. So he is talking about when they're entering this temple, the men can hear a superhuman voice, and all these amazing things are also happening. And by the way, Tacitus is not a Christian. He is a dyed-in-the-wool Roman historian, writes tons of books that are totally historical, never became a Christian, and yet he's recording miraculous things happening. So anyway, contending hosts were seen meeting in the skies, arms flashed, and suddenly the temple was illumined with fire from the clouds. Of a sudden the doors of the shrine opened, and a superhuman voice cried out, "The gods are departing." At the same moment the mighty stir of their going was heard. So you can actually tell that it's still a pagan writing this, because it's multiple gods, and you can hear they're going. Multiple gods are going. Now we know it isn't multiple gods, but that's how he perceived it and recorded it, or his men perceived it. So clearly the men then rushed in, and we'll see later that Titus, the Roman leader, told them to go in and get all the high priest's emblems and all of his stuff, bring it back as booty of war, and so it's clearly Gentiles were in the holiest of holies, where only the high priest can go, where even regular Jews can't go. So this is a complete, an abomination on top of an abomination. Okay, and remember the prophecy also in 27 is that, covenant for a week, and we'll put an end to the sacrifices. Well, everybody thinks that means they tore down the temple or whatever. But actually, in the middle of the siege, on August 5th, the last day of the daily sacrificial lambs ran out for the Jewish people inside of the temple. And if you read the next sentence, is then Titus decides to capitalize on the despondency of the defenders' morale because of something like that. So that also put an end to the sacrifices while the battle was going on, and while they hadn't even taken the temple or the city at all. Also, I just want to mention there's another statement in these are non-Christian websites that are people who love military battles and are telling you what happens bit by bit. So when the victory was won, Titus ordered the holy treasures to be salvaged as his troops acclaimed him imperator. And these items he got were the high priest's tools, investments, and all of that. And he then showed them in Rome. And so this was clearly they had entered the Holy of Holies. And let's go back to verse Daniel 9:26 for a minute. You have the end of the assault upon Jerusalem would come as a flood. And every time you look at the descriptions of what's going on, is the Romans are sieging and they're pushing down doors and pushing down walls, and then when that happens, it's described as they swarm in. But if you think about it, it's just like flooding in, like when you open a door and there's water on the other side, it just bursts in like a flood. So it's and actually in the NIV this is called like a flood. So this is the Israel Bible, but it obviously could be translated as like a flood instead of a literal water flood. This idea of it being fulfilled by virtue of the troops flooding through wasn't my idea. I wanted to give credit to the moorings.org prophecy page. So they said, indeed, the end of Jerusalem came like a flood. The Romans came and stormed the temple, and then the legions poured in through the breaches in the walls and so on. And that could be called a flood as well, or it looks like one in a sense. Okay, and just to make sure we did this again, remember we have to do the 62:7. So the temple destruction comes after the order to restore and build for a period of 62 times 7, and that's computes out. It's not 69 times 7 as the other one. This is 62 times 7. So using the Babylonian lunar years, which are 360 days, it comes out to 7 times 62 is 434 Babylonian lunar years of 360 days, and that converts into 428 solar years at 365 days. And if you subtract 428 solar years from the solar date of 444 BC, you get 16 BC. So you kind of have to convert it all. So it's fulfilled in the sense that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and that is after 16 BC, which is 62 sevens from 444 BC, which is the trigger for both Daniel 9:26 as well it was for Daniel 9:25. And the prophecy also was that the city, and not just the sanctuary, would be destroyed, and that's an unquestionable fact of history. So the Romans proceeded to raise the city. They tore down every building except 3 towers and the western wall, which we can still see to this day, which Titus left as monuments to his victory. Josephus said in his work called The Wars of the Jews 7.1.1. Just want to show you that Jesus prophesied of this. So, I mean, the Romans took down everything. The temple was razed to the ground. All the buildings in the city were razed to the ground. They left 3 towers in the western wall. Jesus said in Matthew 24:1-2, and Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See you not all these things? Verily I tell you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another, that shall not be thrown down. And that was true. That came true. All right, so let's make our conclusion. We're going to look at a couple of slides to draw the conclusion out. So we're going to review Daniel 9:26, the destroyer of the temple. It was 62 times 7 years, and that's after 16 BC, and the temple in the city was destroyed after 16 BC, so that was fulfilled. And then we're going to look at Daniel 9:27, and we'll see there's 6 facts that are true for the Roman siege of 70 AD, so this fits prophecy very well. Okay, and let's see all the fulfillments of this verse 9:26, looking at the NIV and Israel Bible together, synthesized into one. After those 62 sevens, that is the 62 sevens that were in the prior verse about the Messiah coming to the city, coming to Jerusalem presumably. So we have 62 sevens in there, and it's the same 62 sevens here. And 62 sevens alone brings you up to just 16 BC. After the 16 BC, the anointed one will be put to death. So it's true, Jesus was executed sometime after 16 BC, but he also had to come to Jerusalem at 32 AD, and that's why his being cut off actually fits on the other timeline too, because he had to come to Jerusalem to get killed, and so he fulfills both 9, 25, and 26. Okay, but now we got one fulfillment here already. 2, the army of a leader in the Israel Bible, or people of the ruler in our standard Bibles, who will come will destroy. So and that's the other thing. It's expressed that he will come in the future. So it's as if this has to be coming after the anointed one is put to death, and that's true too. And he does destroy the city and the sanctuary. He levels everything, leaves a couple of towers and a wall of the city, but it doesn't do anything but sit there, and you can stare at the wall, which people pray at, but it's not a functioning city. It's been wiped out, destroyed the city. And then so that's 2 items on this one verse. And the end will come like a flood, and that's true. If you look at the swarming nature of the troops coming through walls, battering them down, coming through like water rushing through a pipe or through a very narrow area, they're just flooding in and then overwhelming the people. War will continue until the end. Literally, this war, continued until it was all over, until 1 million people died. I didn't go through all the details. It was a terrible war. And 4, desolations have been decreed. So basically, it sounds like God has ordered these desolations, which means his temple was defiled by Trophimus in approximately 60 AD, 56, 57 AD. And so that was part of the decree. There could have been other reasons why God was angry, but that one we know for sure would have angered him. So because his temple already had been violated by Trophimus, and that's recorded in Acts, I think it's 27 chapter 21 verse 28. So there's 4 fulfillments of this passage here on time schedules and in particularity, and what happened and what the nature of it was and the consequences of it. So it's a dead-on fulfillment. Okay, finally, we're up to the Daniel 9:27, the second verse we're going to look at. So he, the destroyer of the sanctuary city, will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. So we have a covenant with many, likely the client state troops that were provided, all collected in Egypt, and then started marching up the coast, and they were in a covenant to work with Rome on that conquest. 2, it was with many for 1/7, and as we see 7, the siege is said by experts, military type people are looking at it, and they say it went from March to September 70 AD, crossing 7 months. And this is easily explained because you have troops marching to assemble at their base in Egypt, so that's satisfied. 3, this would happen in the middle of the 7. It doesn't see an exact middle, but it's in the middle of the 7. So it happened in August that the people could no longer sacrifice. So I should say, it says in the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. So that I should have added that in there. It did happen. The sacrifice had to end because the people inside ran out of lambs, and the Romans found out about that, and they realized these people were now low morale and were trying to exploit what they had learned. And it doesn't have to be exactly in the middle 100%. It just has to be in the middle of that period, and it did happen. Then the end of the sacrifice, I already explained that. Those trapped inside of the walls, and the temple ran out of their lambs to do their daily sacrifices. The one thing we don't know absolutely about is the offering. That's the daily morning offering. We have no news on that, but obviously by the time the temple is destroyed, that's definitely no longer going to happen. So you can also attribute that to Romans and the fulfillment of prophecy. And 6, an abomination that causes desolation. Again, we have the recollection of Tacitus that the door actually opens without them having to knock it down, and the entry point to the holy area, and the voice of God and comes and talks and everything. And so though they entered into the Holy of Holies, and that's the abomination that causes desolation in the holy place. So we have every fulfillment of pretty much everything here on Daniel 9:27. Prophesied by somebody prophesying, out near 540 BC. Like how many years? That's almost. It's almost. Yeah. It's 600 years. 600 years early. Someone is putting it out to that level of prophecy. Pretty amazing, I think. Well, anyway, so I pray this was edifying to you, that it's something you would want to share with somebody else. And help someone else find that the Bible has these amazing prophecies that came true, and it's trustworthy. These prophecies are definitely trustworthy, and they point to the Lord Jesus Christ. It's an unmistakable, just looking at the face. All right, I hope it's a real blessing to everybody. God bless. Thanks. Ciao.